having me today. I'm PeggySue Imihy Bean, and I am going to share a little bit about our work that we're doing here in the City of Hopkins. Let's see if this happens with me. All right.
I did.
Okay. I thought I would share a little bit about myself first before I dive in, so that you have a sense of who's going to talk to you for 40 minutes. But I am our Special Projects and Initiatives Manager. So I oversee a really wide variety of programs. I oversee parks, sustainability, racial equity, and then newly I started overseeing some of our youth programming work that we do, including our Youth Advisory Board. And I have a Master of Urban and Regional Planning from the Humphrey School at the U. It's a lovely picture of me and my husband. I think that I include this because I don't have a sustainability background. I have an urban planning background. I was like a land use planner before this position. And so everything that I'm going to present in this is really like you can learn so much in a really short amount of time about sustainability. And that is definitely what I had to do in this position. And it's been really fun. I have really enjoyed the variety of experiences that I've gotten to have in this role. And then I also serve as the president of the American Planning Association's Minnesota chapter. So still really involved in the planning world, and it's fun to kind of get to do both. I want to kind of overlay, sometimes when I tell people what my job is, they're like, why? Why? And it's because we really had a vision for, before I started, our organization had a real vision for how these intersect, right? How do parks and racial equity and sustainability all really overlap? And a big part of that is the built environment. Parks really provide that welcoming, accessible, free space for a lot of our residents. But also being responsible stewards of our land and being really sustainability minded, and knowing that sustainability and climate impact our most vulnerable. So how do we keep racial equity at the core of what we do for sustainability work, and parks in the future is where this overlap really comes. So Hopkins, I don't know how many people are super familiar with Hopkins, but we are located in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. I added a map of just kind of how far away we are from you in Rochester, about an hour and a half north of you. We are just under 20,000 in population, and we have some really interesting demographics. We are about 40% BIPOC, so a big proportion of our population is immigrants and refugees from West Africa. But we also have a sizable Latinx population, but we have a lot of Somali immigrants and refugees. And so that really impacts when we think about sustainability as a way to be resilient for the future, and knowing that environmental justice typically affects lower income and residents of color most. It's a really important lens to all of the work that we do here. We also are 65% rental. Most of our residents in Hopkins rent their homes, whether that's in multifamily buildings or in duplexes or single family homes. A vast majority of our residents do not own the unit that they rent in. So when we talk about, decarbonization strategies or things that really are building envelope focus, we're really having to work through. A resident might say, like, I really want this, but we also have that added layer of that they might not own their unit or own their property. And so that's also something we really have to be thinking about when we work on strategies like this. So some other really interesting dynamics of Hopkins is that we have 3 light rail stations, and so we're set to grow by 10% in the next 5 years. And so we're seeing this really rapid increase in population, and that continues to be a contributor for like a really dense urban form that we have. We also have some really great amenities because we're small, we're just 4 square miles. Everything is really accessible. We have some really great regional trails. We have great sidewalk systems. And so we do actually have a pretty large low income population, because it can be really easy to be car free here in Hopkins. You can go to the grocery store, you can go to the doctor. We have good busing into Minneapolis, and then we'll also have light rail soon. And so that attracts a lot of folks who are car free, either by choice or because of cost. And so the one thing that we think about a lot is just how we can have all the building blocks to be this really sustainable city. You know, one of my favorite things I think about is the mayor of Paris really talking about 15-minute cities, right? How can you do everything in 15 minutes on walking or biking or on transit? And that's already sort of a reality here in Hopkins, which is very fun. And when I started, I was the first person in this sustainability role here in Hopkins. We didn't have that, and it's not even really a full role. I do it amongst many other positions that I do. So managing our organizational racial equity work, working with our parks, and so it's not even half an FTE of a person. It is like a partial FTE for us. And so our early sustainability work was super recognition program focused. Like, how do we just like do not the bare minimum, but how do we do what we can do with what we have in terms of staff time? And it also wasn't a huge organizational priority. It was something that we knew we needed to be working on. But again, working on it with what we had, right? We didn't have any sustainability or climate action planning work that had been done. So when I started 2.5 years ago, I was just like, well, let's just get us back on track for some of the things that we had wanted to do, like Soul Smart and Green Step Cities. We now are participating in Partners in Energy with Excel. We had our Tree City USA status had lapsed. So I had a budget of effectively $0. And so I wanted to make improvements and try to get some of those really baseline metrics that were free to us, working on those and using that as a place to build. So we took advantage of some Excel things like Partners in Energy, and they do a fleet analysis with Sawatch Labs that's free to us. So really trying to create baseline metrics without spending $100,000 on a big sustainability plan. But pretty quickly in my time here, like sustainability became a really big focus for our organization. And so now I think, I feel comfortable saying that we're leading some of this work in this area in a really short amount of time because our council changed. And so we have had some amazing council members who are super focused on climate. And so we had no one right before, and I had dedicated staff time on this, but then also our council has been really big champions of climate focused work. And so this is some of our council members at the League of Minnesota Cities conference the last 2 years, which has been really fun to see them really embrace Green Step Cities and be really proud of it, but also trying to find ways that beyond this that they can elevate it. So with that, I think we had a really different focus on our work, a little bit different pressure around how much we're doing and how much education and information and incentives work that we were doing. And so I'm going to share two of the programs that we've worked on in the last 2 years that have kind of led us to where we are right now. And I'll start first with our Hopkins Heat Vulnerability Study. So I mentioned at the beginning, like, I don't really have much expertise in this at all. So when I first started here, I was just trying to like learn everything that I could learn about like what offerings there were for sustainability, whether that was like things like Green Step Cities or just like as much information as I could learn. And one of the things that I came across was this map, which Hopkins is here in the center. And then our surrounding neighbors are outside of this. And this is a map put together by the Metropolitan Council. And it really struck me, right? So the red indicates that like on the hottest days of the year, the land surface temperatures are between 99 and 125 degrees, which to me felt so hot. And it is hot, right? And this is data that's older. This is 2 or 3 year old data at this point. I think we would probably find that on the hottest days it's hotter than this, or we would have, maybe more sections that are approaching those higher points of extreme heat. And I think I became very fixated on this because it really concerned me, right? When we look at this, like a big part of this, there's a lot of factors that go into having such extreme heat temperatures. But what we know about extreme heat is that it has extreme health hazards, right? Like not only is it just like increases the amount of cooling that you need and a variety of other factors, but for people, children learn less well. People who are exposed to asthma or other conditions, those can be worse. So it increases public safety calls. It just like lowers people's quality of life so significantly. And especially after the summer where we're having some like really record hot days, the hottest year on earth. this I think was a very timely project, but I think I just became very focused on like, what do we do about this? Like when we look at this and we're just so much worse than our neighbors and the climate is only going to get hotter, how much worse does this map get? So we're really fortunate to have, there's a funding cycle by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, or the MPCA, where they were doing some climate resilience planning grant work. And the projects could be like anything, like they would fund like stormwater, like planning and like construction documents, or they would plan like resilience planning. And so I had approached some consultants and said, would you help us do this project? I really want to understand like why, right? Like, is it just tree cover? Is it just impervious surface? And like, what do we do, right? And I really had this vision of having a bit more nuanced approach to understanding that map. Like looking at that map, we know it's bad, but like why and how do we have a document that kind of shows what that is? And so we worked with LHB and Local Climate Solutions to put together this project to really identify like how do we increase climate resiliency, but also knowing we go back to this map, you know, some of this hottest places, some of where it's the reddest is also where, as I mentioned, you know, we have that really high rental population and that really high immigrant population. That is where they live. Like anywhere this is red is also where they live because of the type of buildings that they're in. You know, it's a lot of it is multifamily buildings with big parking lots. It's also, you know, adjacent to some of our more bigger commercial areas. And so to me, I was like, we just have to figure out why and also how create some strategies on how we fix it. So we put together this, and another piece of this was like we really wanted this to be an accessible document. We didn't want it to be just like a paper document that we might reference as staff or someone could pull up a PDF, but we wanted it to be really interactive. And so we came up with the idea of using ArcGIS and their story mapping feature to be able to show and illustrate this project. So I actually already have it pulled up, so I'm not going to click the link. I will just drag this over. And so this is what it looks like if you click into the link. Lauren, give me a heads up if you can see, thumbs up if you can still see this. I dragged over it. Okay, perfect. And if you scroll through this, you can actually interact with a lot of features on this. It works really similarly to a website. And so it has, you know, some buttons where you could just kind of skip down if you wanted to go through this and jump around. Otherwise, you can just continue to scroll. And then throughout this, there are all these like kind of interactive widgets here that really start to tell the story kind of piece by piece and kind of visually demonstrates what this project area was, why we did this project, and really taking a look again at these, you know, land uses, right? In this hottest corridor of Excelsior Boulevard and Blake Road, these are 60% of this are parcels that people live in, right? People are experiencing those 99 to 125-degree days in this corridor in housing that is largely, you know, older housing made of concrete or cement block, getting pretty toasty, right? On days that it is hot, they are experiencing that heat. And we also this project kind of explores some of the why, right? Why do we want to do this project? Why do we care about this project? But also, why do people live in this area, right? What are the historical and the legacy of zoning that has created these really large pockets of communities of color living in dense urban housing that is not really heat resilient. And a big part of that is redlining and zoning rules that go back, you know, decades that really limited where people of color could live. And so what we know in Hopkins is that 65% of our population rents, but 90% of our residents of color rent, right? So most people of color, almost all of them live in Hopkins, are living in rental housing, and a good proportion of them are experiencing this. And we know that, like, especially we've seen utility costs go up a huge amount, right? When we have these hot days, residents are paying more to stay cool. And so there's just like so many compounding factors that really make it imperative for us to start to find solutions for this. So I won't go through every piece of this. I really encourage folks to spend time with this and read through all the text. But there's some features of this that I think are really cool where you can play with these buttons and I apologize, this is loading a little slowly, and it starts to kind of overlay all of these different contributing factors that that impact this corridor and that lead us to say, like, oh, we're concerned about this, right? When we start to think about residents who are 65 and older, how many people of them, what percentage of them are living in this corridor, right? We know this southern section or this western section of Excelsior Boulevard is really hot, as well as this southern section of Excelsior Boulevard south of Lake Road. So when we have those extreme heat days, those are people who are, just by the nature of their age, are more, predisposed to health conditions that are negatively impacted by high heat. So really trying to set that stage and really visually demonstrate that, which we thought was really important. And then again, like some cool slider features, like LHB, just a huge shout out to Jess and the LHB team who really built a lot of these maps. This is a map of tree cover, which this corridor that we're studying, right? Is Lake Road is here where my cursor is, and then along here is Excelsior Boulevard, right? There is almost no tree cover. So it's, if we look for just even a singular source of why this is so hot, is it really lacks tree cover, and some of that has happened with a little bit of deforestation with LRT, but mostly this is land use, right? This is because we have some pretty heavy industrial users, and we have apartment buildings that require larger parking lots or are taking up a big portion of the parcel. So it also is really important as we think about recommendations that some of the solutions, like planting trees, is a great solution, but if we don't have land to plant them in, and users aren't willing to convert parking lot or some of those things, we have to be thinking about other solutions, right? Because as much as like planting trees would be really helpful here, there just might not be cases where that's feasible. And so having, some of this is just, it's been really cool to visually show. I think it ends up feeling really stark to people to look at this and be like, wow, that is a lot of missing green, right? So we utilized some recommendations from across the country to really try to get a sense of what are other people doing, what are community-driven solutions, what are policy-driven solutions, and how do we use those as ways to develop recommendations for our community. A big piece of this was knowing that the community is the ones who are really experiencing this the most, and trying to get a sense of how do we engage with them, and how do we hear from them, and the solutions that they came up with were really cool. And it was also really important for us to hear what especially seniors and students had said about this, which, so many of our students had said that they heard parents, talking or complaining or worrying about utility bills, right? We had, heard from our young adults that they, especially after the pandemic, but on extreme heat days like that, they already felt really insulated, and then they couldn't go outside because it was so hot, right? These times when they should be with their friends, when it's so hot in the summer, they just stay inside, right? And they're not, they don't feel like they've adjusted back after the pandemic to that life of normal. Like they've already feel easy, like it's easy enough, right, to just like, talk to friends online. So when it's really hot, they're not going to make that effort to go outside. So they had a lot of really amazing strategies. Some of the things we heard from residents was having like a call system or a volunteer system that people could say, like, I want to be on the list of people to call when there's those extreme heat days. I want someone to check in on me, right? People really wanting better access to cooling centers or places where they didn't feel like it was a burden for them to be there when they were just looking for a cool place to be during the day. And so again, this has some buttons that you can kind of click through and get full summaries of that engagement, as well as the strategies. And as we go through strategies, again, this is where LHB, I think, did an amazing job of kind of reimagining what these spaces might look like. What might it look like if we took this corridor, and this is, I think, a pretty accurate drawing of what some of these corridors look like, and really added solutions that could improve this landscape. And really this incorporates both like some of the policy recommendations, but also built environment recommendations, and how do you do both and overlay that. So again, I will say, like, I really encourage people to kind of go through this, and the pictures change, like the little ways that it recommends for you change as you go through here. But these are beautiful. And so I really encourage people to spend time. And our dream for this, right, and I told Lauren this as we were getting on, is that this is something we really believed that, especially as we talk about the mapping components and thinking about extreme heat, we really believed other municipalities could take this idea and do it pretty simply themselves. We've really built a framework for this. And I think the policy recommendations as well, like we've done so much of the research for it already, like you can just copy this, right? Like we desperately desire for everyone to copy this work and to be inspired by it, to think about where in their community might this be showing up in the same way. Is it a whole corridor like this? Is it just a pocket of neighborhoods? What does that look like? And how do you map that so that you can start to plan for that? So as we think about this, this is an example of the recommendations page. So we try to keep that out of like the exact story map. You kind of click through to this, but really thinking about what are the actions and tools that we could use. How big of an impact would it have, and what was needed to do that? And are there, there's so much money coming out through the IRA and through the federal government. Are there opportunities for us to get money to do some of these things? And so if you click through around the website, you'll see a handful of these sheets that give these kind of really particular recommendations. And so I wanted to just highlight two of those, is just some incentivization categories. And I think we knew pretty quickly as we went through this that like incentivizing change in this corridor was going to be like a necessary component here. We probably were not going to convince people, although, maybe convincing them that like they could lower their utility bills if they put money into it might be enough for people, but we figured we probably have to have dollars at the table. But I'm going to talk about that a little bit in our next section. But as we talk about this, one of the things was, as we created solutions and recommendations, was that data-driven mapping was so important. I think that every time we kind of walk through that map with either partners or other agencies or with our council, like it always feels really, I think, really startling to them, or really crystallizing for them to really see it, to have that visual tool. I think a lot of times with climate work, the ways that we talk about it can be either super overwhelming. The data can be like really scary, and then you just have dread and anxiety, or it can be really hard to imagine how, like, what could you do about it, or to even understand what it means. And I think this project did a good job of creating that for folks, that really like clear visualization that allowed folks to really start to think about how do we move ahead. We utilized a lot of national best practices. A lot of these recommendations come from other communities who extreme heat is newer to the state of Minnesota. I think, we're not used to having the hot summers that we've been having, the warmer winters that we've been having. And there are other places in the country that have been dealing with that for a long time. So really relying on experts across the country. And then sourcing solutions from diverse populations, our students and our seniors, like some of those were just so impactful. I think I love to be warm. Like if I'm like a lizard, and so like I always joke that like if I think a room is warm, it's probably like too hot. And so I think it didn't really until I had heard it from some of these residents just how much they desired to be cool, right? And especially for residents who had health conditions, how much they were willing to give up to stay cool, I think was really impactful as part of this project. And it's really, we've started to think, I'm going to talk a little bit about one of the outcomes for this, but another outcome that I don't have slides for in this is we've been thinking about like cooling centers or resilience hubs. So how do we provide that municipal led buildings where if someone is, if we have a power outage, and someone has equipment that they need to stay plugged in, whether that's like an oxygen machine or other, items that keep them healthy and functioning well during extreme heat, or they just need a place where they feel comfortable to stay cool. This project really drove us to be thinking about that, and it wasn't something we were really thinking about that in depth before. And so as we think about this project, I think we really wanted to tackle the built environment first. there's a million recommendations, but as I highlighted on that first set of recommendations, that incentivization, I think, was one place where we thought people are already kind of doing this work. So how do we create a Hopkins solution for that? So next, I'm going to talk about our Hopkins Climate Solutions Fund, which is an incentives program that offers incentives to residents and businesses to help us accelerate our transition to cleaner and more efficient energy. And this is a program that is designed to leverage utility rebates and federal incentives to kind of reduce those upfront costs with green technology. I have both Excel and CenterPoint's logos on here. Both of them do offer rebates for some of the things in our items. Some of the items that are our projects, our eligible projects, but we don't do any natural gas incentives. So if someone is just switching to a more efficient gas furnace, we would not fund that. Anything that is like a more efficient natural gas-based product, we don't incentivize that. Everything that we have in our program, and I'll talk in more detail about that, is electric-based. So how do we do this and how much do we have? So in 2023, our council used ARPA funds, or American Rescue Plan Act dollars, $150,000 of it for this fund to allow for residents to take advantage of this. We did use another $5,000 for consultant support. We had really a vision for this program being the best, right? Being the most matched, the easiest to access, and making it like as easy and really like a star program. And so we were happy to continue our relationship with Local Climate Solutions on that. And Abby Finnis, who is the lead for that organization, really did a ton of research, and it did a lot of work to really help us line up our incentives, not just with doing research of like the average cost of a lot of things, doing research with the average utility rebates, what we expect IRA dollars to be, so that we could set up residents to really take advantage of all of those things. And I think, again, to kind of just like give a shout out to our council, who really was thinking about this right away, even before we had applications for this fund, was already thinking about how do we continue doing this in perpetuity. And so one tool that local governments are allowed to use here in Minnesota are franchise fees. So it's a small fee that is passed through on your utility bill, paid to the utility company and then passed through to the city. And they raised our franchise fees to both allow for the creation of a new sustainability position, which is really exciting, but also to fund this moving forward. And so I think this is a cool tool that I think we're going to start to see more cities use as a way to make impact in sustainability, is using these franchise fees. A lot of communities' franchise fees just go to like road maintenance or infrastructure maintenance. And I think we've been really creative here in Hopkins. We use it for a variety of things, including parks. And so it wasn't totally obscure to us to use it for something else. And then we have also applied for just under $500,000 of EECBG funding to also kind of help multiply this effort. So I think we have a really big vision for how much money we could give out. I joke that if we get EECBG money, I'm just gonna be calling people being like, let's make a deal. I will give you money. What do you want to do? And I'm sort of kidding on that, sort of not kidding, because I think, if we end up with, over $500,000 of money in 2024, I really am going to be trying to find solutions of like, who has great solar potential? How can we fund them? How can we really push them into doing this so that we can start to decarbonize buildings and save people money on their utility bills, but also really make an impact in our community. So who is eligible? Almost everyone. Like literally, I can give anyone money. But we break it out into 3 categories. The first is income qualified residential. So this is for anyone who owns, rents, or manages a property that serves residents who earn less than 80% and AGI. So for Hopkins, that's $48,000. And this is a large portion of our population, right? 65% of our residents rent. And so we have a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing. We have some legally binding affordable housing. And so we we really wanted this. We wanted 40% of the money to really go to that. I think we will continue to, I think we'll probably fund more and more projects like this. But again, it's going to be, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, of just like reaching out to those residents. But income qualified residential captures a lot of our renters. And that's where the, you know, the challenge is sometimes here is that a lot of these projects are building envelope projects, and they don't own the building envelope. They just rent within it. But we also had an e-bike credit, which I think is pretty amazing. You can bike a lot of places here in Hopkins. And so we were giving $1,000 to residents in this category for an e-bike, which can be the cost of an entire e-bike, depending on the bike that you get. So, and coupled with the state incentives for that and federal incentives, you know, residents in this category could end up with a free e-bike, which could be pretty amazing. We then had like a traditional residential category, which is sort of everyone else, and that we had $30,000 in. And then commercial, which included multifamily buildings that were not income qualified, and our business community. So anything that was 5 or more units, or and with businesses, again, this is where we really wanted not just property owners, but we also wanted like people who are leasing spaces to be able to work with their property owners to be able to take advantage of this fund. We also had what we considered the green infrastructure bonus. So we, for eligible properties, and I'll have a map in the next slide, we were going to give them more money if they're in that heat island area. So, you know, we studied that pretty intensely, and we knew, again, sometimes trees are helpful, but also these are places that really need to be thinking about good strategies for cooling, thinking about how do we maximize if, you know, they're getting this much sun potential, that's a lot of solar potential, right? So how do we maximize on that? And so if they kind of helped us try to reduce that heat island effect through the conversion of pavement, or the provision of trees, or replacing rooftop membranes, we would give them additional incentives on top of the incentives that were open to everyone. So this map here is all of the parcels that are qualified for that. It matches up almost identically with kind of our study area. And we, you know, again, we really wanted to target these businesses and multifamily properties who could really benefit from capturing solar, or just really helping reduce that heat island effect. So what is eligible for the Climate Solutions Fund? So much. Truly, I mean, I think it was fun to see the variety of projects that we thought of, but it's anything. It's anything that you could electrify, but also ways that you can make your building envelope better. So insulation and air sealing, different technologies that are, you know, that can be electric, like induction ranges or electric dryers, improving your water heater either through tankless or using a heat pump, cold climate ready air source heat pumps, and then obviously solar energy systems, EV charging, and then that electric bike is a unique feature of our program. I think a lot of communities don't tend to offer this. We really try to pick projects that lined up again with IRA funding, and then you know, also things that we knew would immediately provide cost savings to residents. That's a big piece of this, right? Is not just having that sustainable technology, but knowing that you're trading the initial upfront cost for shorter savings on the back end of your utility bills. For commercial, it's very similar, but there are some other electrification projects that we would consider if someone approached us with it as well. So we try to make this a little bit more flexible for residents, or for commercial property owners, just knowing that every business is super unique. So if they came to us with a technology that they're saying, you know, this would really reduce our energy costs, you know, and this is something we really want to do, having that flexibility to be able to do that. And then just a snapshot of kind of the timeline. We really anticipated that, especially in the residential category, we would have a lot of applications. And so we did this as a lottery rather than as first come, first serve. And that was because we knew that people would probably need time to get thwe together, right? I didn't want everyone who was just like, I know I can buy an e-bike online, let me like submit, and like that's where all the money went, was e-bikes. We wanted to be able to give people the time to get together with a solar provider or talk to their landlord, and have that opportunity. So we did just obviously today is the 20th. So on Monday, I got to send a lot of really fun emails congratulating people and get a lot of happy emails back. But this is what our first round of applications looked like. We had 34 requests for just under $50,000 of funds. Most of them were traditional residential, and then we had 3 income qualified residential, which does not surprise me that we did not have any commercial projects. And I think that's just because commercial projects are going to take longer and a little bit more work from staff time. But it was fun. You know, I was a little nervous that I was just going to have like a million electric bike applications, which would have been great, but I really wanted to see like a variety of technologies, and that's what we ended up with. So we had, 9 applications for solar energy systems. We had a bunch of induction range ones. We had a wide variety of some of those more unique ones, like a dryer or water heaters. And so I think it was definitely a lesson learned. We have some pretty great lessons learned. I think first is just making things really simple, and really having sizable incentives is what really helped. I think we gave away a lot of money in this first round to residents who it was so easy. We don't require an energy squad visit. We don't require like any pre-paperwork. We just require that they know what they want to do and that they're willing to do it within the time frame. And we push for some of those small changes. It didn't have to be, every project did not need to be a solar energy system. We were happy with e-bikes and ranges, because those are things that will either switch people from gas or natural gas, and or impact their utility bills. But we did learn, I think, especially for commercial property owners, that they really need more education and that things take time. So, again, we're not disappointed by seeing no commercial applications, because I think it just takes a little bit higher touch with those applicants, and really thinking about, maybe having staff walk through that, or having that planner visit to try to figure out what in my facility could really benefit from this. What is my solar potential? What would that cost? So I think that, we're pretty happy with this first round, but we know we have some work. So next steps is, first of all, just hoping we get more funding in this. That would allow us to do some bigger projects, some more impactful work. I think our rebates, if you look online, and the links are provided in the slide deck, if you look online, our rebates are super generous. Like, we give up to $4,000 for solar energy systems, right? We're doing some pretty big incentives, but sometimes that's just still not enough. And so when we're going to reopen the fund again in 2024 with that money that we have from franchise fees, and we will be hiring a sustainability planner and trying to do more of that direct engagement. But one of the big things that I think I came away with this from was we needed to retool the program, because I think it's fairly flexible, but I really wanted to be able to impact people as they're coming into our planning and economic development department to build a building, right? How do I capture them then and get them to change their building envelope, or change the things that they're thinking about putting into a building, to be able to give them money then, and say, I would very much love to convince you to build your building to be solar ready, or I would love to go through and talk about, using an air source heat pump instead of, a traditional furnace system in this building. So I think that that's something we're going to be thinking about over the next, couple of months as we retool this program, and then just doing more engagement, making sure the community knows about it more, and really making sure that we have, we can answer more questions for people and get them, the people always just want to know, well, who should I trust for solar? And so trying to figure out what does that look like in terms of providing education for folks. So I will just plug, we did, my mayor and I did an entire podcast with City Climate Corner about both of these projects. So if you want to hear more of a council perspective on this work, and hearing from our mayor, I think this is it's a nice add to this presentation, and they asked some great questions on this, but I've been talking for a long time, so I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'm always happy to chat with folks too. If you're interested in sending an email, or you want to learn more about our program, or if there's anything that I can share, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much, PeggySue, for joining us. Oh, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing all of this great work. It's always just great to see what other cities are doing and what might inspire that we could do here in Rochester as well. So I will just open it up if any of our participants have any questions.
Looks like there's a question from Micah.
Or I think it
Oh,
might be
clapping.
clapping.
Oh,
I can definitely, I have a question and maybe I'll give some time for people to think here, but I'm curious, you've talked about having a supportive council with this. Is that something that is kind of a journey or a progression that you've seen? Has there been barriers or challenges to getting to this point and kind of seeing more of that investment and support come from the city, either through council or leadership?
great question. So um, we are at an advantage, I think, a little bit, which is that our mayor is also the director of environment for the city of Minneapolis. So I think he came in kind of knowing what he wanted to do and with a lot of experience in running a lot of similar programs and similar initiatives. And so I think we sort of went from like 0 to 100, and we didn't really have to do much as staff to sell them on that. He really came in saying this is a priority for him, and he got the other council members on board, but I don't think it took very much because I think they also we have quite a few council members who just really care about this work as well. So and are pretty passionate about it. And so with that switch of the council, we had some new members added. I think that really that sort of took care of itself, right? We didn't have to do much of a sales pitch on that. And I think I've been really fortunate that they've trusted us on this work a lot and trusted the consultant teams that we've had. So yeah, it's sort of wild. Like I have a lot of empathy for folks who have to really like push on their councils because I really didn't have to do that. And that has been really a great treat in doing this work, is having a council that just like really intrinsically gets it and is supportive of it.
Yeah, I think it's just so unique everywhere with each city and, how if it's strong mayor, weak mayor, what that looks like and the messaging and how it's aligned in the culture that's being built there as well. I'm curious with the urban heat, the vulnerability study, now that that's all done and wrapped up, is there funding for some of that implementation and next steps within that?
Yeah, that is something that I'm hoping that as we have more staff capacity, we'll be hiring. Hopefully, I'm hoping that we'll have that position posted in October and have someone onboarded by the end of the year. That will be something that they can own and kind of look through what do they want to move first on. We do have some franchise fees that were set aside for sustainability work beyond staff salaries and the Climate Solutions Fund. So there is some money, but it hasn't been dedicated to anything yet because we just right now don't have the capacity, right? I'm managing all of this as like a third of a person. And so it'll be really fun to have. I think it's going to depend a lot too on like what does a person come in with experience as, if we have someone who has, a good background in community organizing or something like that, maybe they move on some of the pieces that residents asked us for in terms of like social connectedness. But if they have a different background, like they might select just something else that they really feel confident that they can lead. So I think it's pretty open ended, and we probably need to have more staff discussions. But there is money that we have set aside for some of this work.
Any questions from anyone on the call today? I'll ask one more before we wrap up. You mentioned and shared some of the demographics in your community, and I'm curious with these programs that you're implementing or you're starting to or looking at, um, have there been barriers or challenges with connecting with and integrating and just getting this information in front of those groups that maybe are more vulnerable or impacted by these changes that we're seeing in relation to climate change?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's, especially with our immigrant and refugee population, I think just generally a lack of trust, right, with like government organizations. And so, there's also a language barrier for a lot of folks. So we did hire an interpreter for that for some of our events just to ensure that we could address the language barrier there. But I think it can be really hard. It's not going to be a population we're going to reach with a survey, right? Or with like any traditional methods. So one of the events, and I didn't talk about our events in super big detail, but one of the events that we did was the school district had a bunch of bikes and they give them away every year. And they had this event and couldn't give away all the bikes. So they asked if we would store them at Public Works, and we're like, yeah, we'll store them. And then they didn't really ever like have anything to do with them. So I was like, can I give these away? Like if I have an event, can I give all these bikes away? And it was like 50 bikes. And so we used that as a tool to get people out. Was we were like, come to this event, there's free food and I will give away bikes. And the amount of people that were just so thrilled for the opportunity for like used bikes, like not even brand new bikes, like people were freaking so excited about this. And that was a great, like it was such a great, easy way to like drum up excitement about this event and talk to people on a really hot day about this. And so just trying to like, and we did it at a local restaurant that is a smaller restaurant, and so people were already going there right for dinner, or like we're familiar with the space. And so I think we had some great community allies who knew people and also knew people who would really want bikes. And so they were calling people on our behalf saying like, you should come to this thing. Like, I don't really know what it's about, but there's gonna be free bikes. And so I think that's just like my advice is like the community doesn't always have to know what you're going to ask them for, but they should have something they're going to like get out of it, right? Or they should be, if you're giving them that incentive of whether it's a free meal or if it's, whatever that is, that excitement, like figuring out what your community needs, providing it for them, and then asking your questions on the side, I think was a strategy that really worked for us. We really try to do that as much as we can, is meeting people, whether that's they're already out playing in parks or they're already out walking on trails, and trying to grab them that way. But then also like that was an event that was super successful, was just like, I did not know how many people in our community would be so excited to get a used bike. But they were, and they came out, and that was an event where they just shared so much with us, like especially like our smaller population, just sharing like they didn't really understand why utility bills had been so expensive, right? And they couldn't, it wasn't just the summer they were worried about, but they were also worried about heating in the winter. And so we really sourced some amazing conversation from that. And I don't think a lot of them knew what they were getting themselves into. They just came because they heard there'd be free bikes. And you know what? I think that is fine by me.
It gets them there. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for our sustainability series this month. We really appreciated having you and hearing about the programs in Hopkins. We will follow up for participants and our email listserv with the recording of today's webinar series, as well as the presentation slides. So thank you all and have a great rest of your day.